Take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
So I think, in my personal opinion, it is time for John Iadarola to leave the TYT network. For anybody who's not aware, most of you probably are, Cenk Uygur, the owner of TYT, the Young Turks, and the entire network, recently stepped in to officially ban Francesca Fiorentini from the network. So Francesca Fiorentini is a left-wing commentator who's been a contributor to TYT in various forms for quite a long time. She's done interviews on the main show, she's featured on the main show, and she regularly featured on the Damage Report, as well as her own show, The Bituation Room, being a part of the TYT network. So she notoriously has been getting into it with Cenk, going back and forth with him. They had a debate a little while back about Cenk's not only apparent right-wing pivot, but this new strategy that he has of wanting to organize with right-wingers while simultaneously denigrating parts of the left that he views as too extreme, in his words, the max left, and that includes Francesca Fiorentini for her unabashed and uncompromising support of trans people in general, in all different contexts, including sports, etc. So Francesca, of her own volition, asked for her show to be removed from the TYT network. She did not want to be distributed through them anymore, and she was still featuring on John Iadarola's show, The Damage Report. So Cenk has stepped in, said, we no longer want you on The Damage Report. You know, we don't want you to feature on this network at all. The justification that he gave was that, you know, various vulgarities on the part of Francesca Fiorentini, really nothing that crazy. Certainly nothing crazier than things Cenk Uygur has said himself. However, directly targeting Cenk Uygur with sentiments like calling him a bitch for capitulating to the right wing, etc. So a lot of people are pointing out that this is hypocritical of Cenk because he's built this whole platform on unabashed commentary of this kind. So not just reasoned and thoughtful commentary from a left-wing perspective, but also confrontational, bombastic types of commentary aimed at reaching a large audience and affecting change. That's kind of the TYT brand. That's certainly Cenk Uygur's brand. He is no stranger to profanities and insulting people and taking a very unapologetic stance on any issue. He's, had vociferous debates with Anna Kasparian on air, as well as other contributors going all the way back to Jimmy Dore, etc. But he felt that Francesca Fiorentini crossed the line too many times, I guess, where, Francesca was certainly, I don't know if she was trying to get a rise out of him, but again, she was being very unapologetic and unabashed in her criticisms of him. I will say that her criticisms of him definitely sounded like somebody who's not employed by the person that she's talking about. It's the kind of things that you would say about somebody who's not your boss. And to be fair, technically he is no longer her boss, and I don't know that he ever really was, because her show is not distributed through them anymore. So she's more like a contractor. She's a contributor to the show. And Cenk feels that no contributors should be allowed to say the types of things that Francesca was saying about Cenk Uygur. Again, calling him a bitch and saying that his brain was broken by the 2024 election, etc. And, on the face of it, I guess you could say that, that sort of makes sense, except for the fact that Cenk Uygur is trying to create something that allows for a wide variety of free speech. And not only does Francesca's commentary fall under that, the idea that these were super personal attacks, I don't really agree with. She was making political points at every turn, even if she was using certain language that Cenk didn't like to express those political points. But also, what she was doing was in the interest of trying to recenter the TYT conversation and to say, we are frustrated with you, Cenk, because you have always been a fighter for the left, and now you're becoming more and more unrecognizable. And frankly, the type of commentary that Francesca was doing is closer to what we have come to expect from TYT than what Cenk has been doing. This sort of capitulating to the right, essentially admitting defeat, saying the left has been defeated, the Democrats were defeated in this election, and so now we have to capitulate. That's essentially his strategy. Not in those words, that's not how he would put it, but especially on issues like trans people and even immigration and crime, Cenk's position is that we need to abandon long-standing and long-held left-wing principles and approaches to these topics in the interest of trying to build bridges with the right-wing coalition that helped to elect Donald Trump. And so when we see Francesca Fiorentini calling him a bitch and saying that it's essentially unforgivable for him to be making some of these pivots. She never used that word, but that was kind of the tone that she was taking with him. And, that is a lot more familiar to a lot of people who want to hear combative and unapologetic commentary from the left wing. And there's a lot of people, even in TYT's audience, who have no interest in the damage report or who are not primary watchers of the damage report, who are frustrated by the fact that Cenk is no longer taking this combative stance. In fact, he is much more combative at the current moment with the left than he is with the right. And that, what he did by banning Francesca Fiorentini from the damage report is an example of that. He's going out of his way to say this person has to be removed from this network. And to be clear, on the damage report is not where Francesca Fiorentini was criticizing Cenk Uygur. And the clips that Cenk played to illustrate his point about Francesca Fiorentini, none of them came from the damage report. So this is not an issue of Francesca is coming on our network and saying things about the head of our network that are unacceptable, which really, if you ask me, that's the kind of behavior we expect from the legacy media companies and, executives within the mainstream media world, where on CNN, Fox News, etc., you can't get away with saying certain things if it's too critical of the person who leads the network, but too critical of issues that are important to the person that leads the network. Like Israel would be a perfect example, and we just recently saw Joy Ann Reid be removed from MSNBC ostensibly because of her commentary, even just her willingness to criticize Israel and their genocide in Gaza at all. And so that's the kind of behavior that we see Cenk moving towards. And for a lot of people who say, it's totally fair, Francesca Fiorentini's behavior is beyond the pale, and any boss, name another profession where you could say things like that about your boss and not get fired. There's truth to that. I couldn't say things like that about my boss and not get fired. However, the problem is that Cenk is supposedly trying to build something different than the types of operations that we're used to seeing in mainstream media. And more, whether it's, selling off the studio to Polymarket or taking certain kinds of brand sponsorships that Cenk has said in the past he would never take, and those sort of things. It seems like Cenk is moving more and more towards the type of business model that we see in mainstream media companies. And so the frustration against him, whether it's Francesca Fiorentini or the many people who are choosing to abandon the network, is not so much that it's unacceptable for someone to fire an employee who's calling them a bitch. It's the fact that you, this entire time, have been telling us that you're trying to create a different type of community, something where people have access to free speech, where people can criticize you when you are wrong. And this really comes down more so to Cenk having his heels too dug in on this issue. And while he would say the same thing about Francesca Fiorentini, that she is, too arrogant about her positions on trans people or whatever, even though most of the country disagrees with you. And Sam Seder made the point that, if you are abandoning your principles because of, some vague polling that's coming out, then, you never had those principles in the first place. And I think that's true. And that's really the core of the issue with Cenk Uygur. It's like, why are you abandoning these positions when not only is it not true that these things are widely unpopular? What it is it's a media panic. The idea that trans people should have dignity, and even that trans people should be able to compete in sports on a wider level, is not really something that people care about that much. But when you inflate the issue and make it about things that it isn't about, like Floyd Mayweather being able to box with women on a day's notice, then people start to have different opinions about it. But anyway, the point that I want to get to here is that I think it's time for John Iadarola to leave the network. And there's a lot of reasons for that, that I think that. I want to be careful about this because, frankly, I do think that it's obviously not my decision. You could argue it's none of my business or any of our business to be saying what John Iadarola should or shouldn't do. He seems like a pretty non-confrontational person, and like what he wants to do is just kind of keep his head down, stay working, stay doing the good work, fighting the good fight, and be consistent about his principles. But the problem is there does come a point where working for this person is starting to contradict your principles. And even if Francesca Fiorentini being kicked off the network is not that line, is it not an indication that we're going in that direction? I mean, there was a time where this type of scenario would have seemed completely outlandish, if not, like something that would never happen, especially in this type of context. But Cenk, having taken this new right-wing slant, really wants to make his point known that, okay, dissent from my opinions is supposedly still allowed, but you're not allowed to put it in certain terms. And that's the first step to saying that certain types of criticisms in general are not allowed. I mean, how many steps away are we from Cenk not wanting people who express certain, quote, max left sentiments to be allowed on his platform at all? It seems like we're not that far away from that. And so John Iadarola is in an odd position where he runs his own show. He's the one who does the booking. He's the one who made the calls about having Francesca Fiorentini on the platform in the first place. And now Cenk Uygur is stepping in and saying, we don't want Francesca Fiorentini on the network at all, which means we don't want her on your show. And he is asserting his authority as the boss of the network, which again, I think if you're the head of a left-wing network, you should be kind of fundamentally opposed to doing things like that. In my opinion, the whole project here should be allowing people like John Iadarola not only to say what they think, but to have who they want on their platform. And it's one thing to say, you're bringing somebody on who's calling for violence. You're bringing somebody on who is saying like horrific things about minorities or whatever group of people. There are certain things that I think would be within bounds to remove somebody from the platform for. But criticizing Cenk Uygur, even in harsh terms, I don't think is one of those things. And you could argue Francesca Fiorentini was really pushing the line. Maybe you think that. I don't really think that the clips that Cenk was referring to really hold that much weight. I just don't think it's that big of a deal. I think it was personal for him, and he wanted to exert his authority over his network. And so that's all well and good, but my position is that when your boss does something like that, what he's doing is he's using his leverage against John Iadarola. He's saying, this network and effectively your show is mine. So regardless of what you think, regardless of who you want to have on your platform, here's what we're going to do. That's what Cenk Uygur's doing. And so John Iadarola, as essentially a worker, an employee, I don't know the specifics of his deal. Maybe he is more of a contractor, but considering the show itself is owned by the TYT network, and I don't think John Iadarola could just take it and move on elsewhere, he is effectively an employee. And so Cenk, in my opinion, has put him in a position where he's got to remind Cenk that he has some leverage as well. He has this enormous audience, which is a big part of TYT's audience. I mean, the main show has a decent following, but the Damage Report kind of has a following all its own. And even the fact that Francesca Fiorentini was a consistent contributor on that show, and John Iadarola has a wide audience that is disappointed by the fact that Francesca Fiorentini was kicked off of the show, that shows you that the people who are showing up for John Iadarola are different from the people who are still showing up for Cenk and Anna. The people who are still showing up for Cenk and Anna, at best, are people who are put off by some of this rhetoric that we're getting from them now, but are still hanging on because they still want to trust them. And at worst, these are people who are more right-wing than anything else, or at least kind of edging in the center-right direction. And so that's the audience that they think it makes sense to build at this point. And John Iadarola's audience is different from that, because John Iadarola has never compromised in terms of his principles on what he wants to cover and how he wants to cover those things. And he's remained pretty consistent. So the point being that if John Iadarola says, I'm leaving this network, and I'm going to just figure out what happens next, that's going to deal a significant blow to Cenk Uygur. And he knows it. It's a big part not only of the audience that they've built, but of the income that they've built. And it seems we can kind of extrapolate from Cenk's behavior that he's suffering financially, one way or the other. I mean, he seems to be making moves in the interest of keeping his business afloat, whether it's taking deals with Polymarket or trying to pull these kind of weird grifter moves of moving to the right. Again, things we've seen Jimmy Dore and Dave Rubin do, realizing that it's more profitable to appeal to the right, and so just doing that. And so these are the kind of things that you do when you need to get your money situation right. And if Cenk is going to pull his leverage on John Iadarola and basically play the cards of saying, this is my network and we're not going to have anybody on my network that is saying these things about me, John Iadarola can say, well, this is my audience and this is the platform that I've built, and I'm not going to allow you to make those type of decisions over my head, especially in a way that directly affects me and my audience. And, this is my plea to him, is that he has the power to do that. And I think he should. And I would say the same thing about anybody in any type of employer situation. These are the type of dynamics that happen between employees and employers quite often. And in America, we are conditioned to not use our leverage as workers, frankly, because usually the consequence for the worker is worse than the consequence for the employer. In other words, the business probably is going to keep going. Some of you out there might have had a job at some point that you were forced out of, or that you quit, or maybe a couple of you quit, you got a few of your friends to walk out, whatever happened. And it's nice to think, if I leave, that place is going to fall apart because they've come to depend on me and they need me. And there's always some truth to that, because if you've ever been at a place where an important employee left, sometimes that does fuck things up for a while. But in general, in my experience, what I've found is that no one employee is able to bring the entire operation down by leaving. And so as satisfying as we might think that would be, that if John Iadarola left the Young Turks, that would be the final blow and the network would fall apart. That's almost certainly not what's going to happen. But it would be a financial blow to Cenk Uygur. And that's the kind of thing that I think in this situation needs to happen. I don't think that Cenk Uygur, what he's doing, he either made the calculation that John Iadarola is not going to leave because of this, or that even if he does, that's fine. It's likely that he factored that in. And again, I've had this happen to me before, where a boss fires somebody who's close with me and kind of has it written into the plan that if I leave because of that, then they'll replace me or do whatever. So he probably factored it in that John Iadarola potentially could leave over this. And I think John Iadarola should call his bluff on that, because it would draw a line in the sand. There are lines being drawn right now. whether it's Cenk firing Francesca Fiorentini or even the Majority Report deciding to cover this for a significant amount of time. This seems to be indicating that whatever's happening at TYT, there is a real concrete split that's happening that's different from just, well, I, Cenk Uygur, don't want to talk to Francesca Fiorentini on my main platform. But no, I don't want people like her and people saying the things that she's saying to be on this platform at all. So there's a line being drawn there. And I think at very least, John Iadarola should not underestimate his ability to draw that same line in the sand. It would financially hurt Cenk Uygur. It would send the message that he has gone in a direction that many of us on the left cannot abide anymore. And it would also be a significant step towards alienating TYT even further, to where, Damage Report is a significant part of their leverage in terms of them being a left-wing network and being a big portion of the left-wing audience on YouTube. And, I think now's probably a good time to draw that line in the sand and distinguish the fact that what Cenk Uygur did is not the actions of somebody who is standing up for left-wing principles. And I'm not going to go as far as to say that I think it would, be damaging to the character, no pun intended, of John Iadarola to leave. I think he's a good guy, and I fully understand why he might not feel like he should or can leave. We've all been in that position before as well, where it's like, yes, I would love to quit over this. Yes, I would love to ditch my job because my boss is being an asshole, but what's going to happen to me, right? How am I going to survive? How am I going to pay my rent? But look, first of all, these are careers in media that we're talking about, okay? So while I can't speak to what John Iadarola has going on, it would be arrogant of me to say that I have any idea of what his financial situation looks like. I think it's probably a good bet that even if he quit TYT tomorrow with no backup plan, he's probably going to be okay. He has a career in media, and he has a big enough name that if he started his own YouTube channel tomorrow and started posting on it, that audience that used to show up for the Damage Report would find him and start showing up for him. It might take a while, it might, those hundreds of thousands or, however many subscribers he has, I think it's 1 million or more, they might not show up overnight, but they probably would show up because that's how this stuff works. I remember when Joe Budden got pushed out of Complex when he was doing the Daily Struggle, and it looked like that might be the end of his career because nobody really was seeing Joe Budden on a daily basis until he started working with Complex. And for those who don't know, he had sort of a debate show with DJ Academics for a while. This was in maybe 2015 or 16. And it was a really popular show because they would get on there and they would scream at each other about the different sides of hip hop. Joe Budden was like old school hip hop. DJ Academic was like new school fuckboy hip hop. And so they would argue about it, about the numbers, about the merit, all that. And when Joe Budden got pushed out by Complex, it was like, well, what the fuck are you going to do now? I mean, Complex gave him a lot of relevance. There's no question about that. But the bet that Joe Budden made, Joe Budden decided at that moment to bet on himself. And he said, no, Complex didn't give me relevance. I gave them relevance. I went on their platform and I was bombastic and I was entertaining and I had thoughts and commentary that people showed up for. And that's what made that show viable. And so he went back to his own podcast and started building that up. And guess what? Joe Budden is one of the biggest podcasters in the world. Since then, he was not when that happened. But he is now, because the people who had been showing up to that Complex show, it was called Daily Struggle, because they liked to see these clashes between Joe Budden and DJ Academics, a significant portion of those people showed up for Joe Budden's platform, and he was able to build his own thing where he could say what he wanted and not worry about consequences from his employers. So I don't know what's going to happen. Again, I don't want to make this a personal moralizing thing against John Iadarola. I respect his decision either way, but I do think it's less respectable for him to stay at TYT, and I think now is a great time for him to distinguish himself from that because TYT has been a valuable platform for a long time, but I think it's starting to become a stain. And the more they can be alienated for the fact, not just that they are trying to talk to right-wingers and have conversations, but the fact that they are continually denigrating people on the left, people that they said that they would be fighting for, and people that they built a platform fighting for. If they're going to abandon those people and say, well, we need to take a more center-left position, that's fine. But the left can also pull their card and abandon TYT as well. And I think maybe Cenk is not appreciating how much that is going to hurt his platform. And so I think John Iadarola is in a good position to show him that. And I think it would be okay. I think John would be able to build his own platform. And I think this is a good lesson to all of us, that having a network of people that you can fall back on that might be able to help you when you're in a pinch or help you find other opportunities, that is your leverage. And if you have that type of network that you've built on your own, and then your boss starts fucking with you, your source of income starts becoming weird, then you can say, no, fuck you, I'm calling your bluff. And I'm going to rely on the people who stand by me, because I know that's going to help me build a stronger platform. And John Iadarola, if you're listening, I think you can do that. I think you should do that. And if you do, I will support you every step of the way.